The great fortunes of America rarely disappear overnight. Instead, they often diminish gradually, each generation spending more than it earns, selling more than it acquires, until only the buildings remain as witnesses to former glory. Of all the dynasties that defined America's Gilded Age, none rose higher or fell harder than the Vanderbilts. Their name, once synonymous with railroad monopolies and staggering wealth, had become by the 21st century something else entirely, a study in how quickly fortune can turn to misfortune. In August 2018, this long decline reached its most humiliating chapter when the last Vanderbilt descendants in the Breakers received an eviction notice from their ancestral home. The Breakers, that 70-room palace overlooking the Atlantic in Newport, Rhode Island, had housed 4 generations of the family's branch. Now, the Preservation Society, charged with protecting the mansion, had decided the family itself was no longer welcome. How the Vanderbilts came to be expelled from their own creation reveals more than simple financial failure. It exposes the particularly American pattern of wealth through ruthlessness and lost through carelessness, of empires built by titans and squandered by their children. Today on Old Money Mansions, we tell this remarkable story of reversal. How the family that once controlled more wealth than the US Treasury ended up getting kicked out of their own house. Most Americans who tour the Breakers in Newport, Rhode Island today have no idea that until very recently, actual Vanderbilts lived upstairs, while visitors below marveled at the breakfast room's platinum walls and the great hall's painted ceiling. The great-great-grandchildren of Cornelius Vanderbilt II were making coffee in their third-floor apartment, paying a symbolic rent of $1 per year. It was an arrangement that seemed destined to continue forever, a living link between past and present that gave the mansion something no other Gilded Age museum could claim. In the mid-1800s, Cornelius Vanderbilt, better known to New York's elite and its working poor as the Commodore, transformed a sharp business instinct into the foundation of America's greatest transportation empire. After years of distinguished service with Thomas Gibbons's steamship operation, Vanderbilt struck out on his own with a strategy both simple and ruthless. He undercut his rivals with fares so low they had no choice but to pay him to leave their routes, a practice that made him rich and his competitors desperate. But his dominance over the waterways was merely the opening act. As the 1860s began, the Commodore turned his attention to the iron rails that were stitching America together. He acquired the Hudson River Railroad, then seized control of the New York Central Railroad in a hostile takeover that left Wall Street stunned. Not content with these prizes, he added the Lakeshore and Michigan Southern Railway to his empire. These weren't mere business transactions. They were conquests that reshaped the economic geography of a nation. By his death in 1877, the Vanderbilt fortune stood virtually without rival, the Commodore's name carved in the very backbone of American commerce. Yet to understand the Vanderbilt legacy solely through ledgers and stock certificates would be to miss half of the story. The family's ambitions extended beyond commerce into stone and mortar, creating monuments to their wealth that would outlast the fortune itself. Consider the Biltmore estate, George Washington Vanderbilt II's 250-room colossus nestled in North Carolina's Asheville Mountains. Constructed with Indiana limestone across a footprint stretching 365 feet, it remains America's largest private residence, a Gilded Age fantasy rendered in perfect architectural detail. The stories those particular walls could tell would make even the most jaded socialite blush, which is why we save the juiciest tales for our free Substack newsletter, which you can access by clicking the first link in the video description. But the Vanderbilt architectural legacy found its most dramatic expression in Newport, Rhode Island. There, on Ochre Point Avenue, rose the Breakers, commissioned as a summer retreat for Cornelius Vanderbilt II. The renowned architect Richard Morris Hunt began work in 1893, completing the mansion in 1895. Drawing inspiration from the Renaissance palaces of Genoa and Turin, the Breakers announced itself as something unprecedented on American shores. Its limestone and brick facade housed a great hall soaring 50 feet in every direction, a space designed to humble visitors with its sheer scale. When the breakers emerged from the ashes of its fire-damaged predecessor in 1895, it represented more than architectural ambition. It stood as the supreme expression of Vanderbilt dominance. Yet by the 1920s, the first cracks in the foundation were already showing. The once bottomless Vanderbilt wealth, divided among heirs with expensive tastes and limited business sense, as the Great Depression approached, the family's control over their empire loosened. They found themselves navigating a new financial world, one where old money no longer guaranteed perpetual power. The mansions remained, magnificent and immovable, but the fortune that built them was already beginning its long retreat. As the 1940s gave way to the 1950s, America discovered a new way for preserving its architectural past. This movement had deep roots, stretching back to the 19th century when concerned citizens fought to save the homes of founding fathers John Hancock and George Washington from demolition. Those early battles sparked a national debate that would define the next century. Should historical buildings be preserved at any cost, or should economic progress take precedence? Into this debate stepped organizations like the Preservation Society of Newport County, Rhode Island, a group of civic-minded individuals determined to save the past from the wrecking ball. Catherine and George Warren founded the society in 1945, initially calling it the Georgian Society with a specific mission in mind. They aimed to protect Hunter House, a Georgian colonial masterpiece overlooking Newport Harbor, from developers eager to tear it down for something more profitable. Against this backdrop, the Breakers Mansion at 44 Ochre Point Avenue faced its own crossroads. Built as Cornelius Vanderbilt II's summer palace, by 1945, the estate had evolved from a private family retreat into an object of intense public fascination. The turning point came when Gladys Vanderbilt, Cornelius II's youngest daughter and the estate's guardian since 1934, made a decision that would change everything. With a pragmatic eye toward both preservation and financial necessity, she opened the Breakers' doors to the public in 1948. This wasn't simply about displaying the mansion's splendor to curious visitors. Gladys understood that ticket sales could help maintain the enormous property while supporting the Preservation Society's broader mission. The arrangement took the form of what amounted to a gentleman's handshake, charging the symbolic sum of $1 per year. This allowed the Preservation Society to manage the Breakers as a public museum, while Gladys retained her private apartment on the third floor. It represented an elegant compromise. Private residence above, public spectacle below. The Breakers quickly transformed into a pilgrimage site for Americans fascinated by the excesses and ambitions of the Gilded Age. Thousands filed through its rooms each year, gaping at the platinum-leafed breakfast room and the hand-painted ceilings that spoke of an era when money seemed limitless. But beneath this harmonious arrangement, tensions were already building. The Vanderbilt heirs, who had initially welcomed the partnership as a way to preserve their heritage, began to eye the Preservation Society's growing influence with concern. What started as a mutually beneficial arrangement would gradually reveal fundamental differences in how each party viewed the Breakers' future. The descendants saw a family home that happened to welcome visitors. The Preservation Society increasingly viewed it as a public trust where the family happened to live. As the decades passed, these competing visions would set the stage for a confrontation that neither the Vanderbilts nor the Society's founders could have imagined. The year 1972 marked a fundamental shift in the Breakers' long history when the Preservation Society of Newport County made an offer the Vanderbilt heirs couldn't refuse. For $366,000, roughly $2.4 million in today's currency, the Society would purchase the entire mansion outright. It was, by any measure, an extraordinary bargain for 70 rooms of Gilded Age magnificence on Newport's most prestigious avenue. Yet this transaction involved more than just money exchanging hands. The deal came with an understanding, written into the very spirit if not the letter of the agreement, that the Vanderbilt presence would continue within the Breakers' walls. Countess Anthony Chapati, Gladys's heir, retained her residence after the sale. When she eventually departed, her children, Gladys and Paul Chapati, moved into the third-floor apartments, maintaining the family's unbroken connection to the mansion their great-grandfather had built. Their presence served as more than mere symbolism. They weren't distant relatives making occasional ceremonial appearances, but direct descendants who called the breakers home. They occupied what had once been servants' quarters, now converted into private apartments, living quiet lives above the daily parade of tourists. But the Vanderbilt descendants viewed this new arrangement with mixed emotions. While they appreciated the Preservation Society's dedication to maintaining the property, friction soon emerged over fundamental questions of stewardship. The family began to notice what they perceived as a troubling attitude toward Vanderbilt artifacts and heirlooms. Items that held deep personal meaning were sometimes treated as mere museum pieces, their emotional significance subordinated to their display value. Whispers circulated around the family about creeping commercialization, about the society prioritizing visitor numbers over historical authenticity. The society staff, the descendants felt, occasionally displayed an unfortunate tendency to minimize the family's ongoing connection to the property. Meanwhile, the 1980s brought new financial pressures that strained the already delicate relationship. The Vanderbilt fortune, once seemingly infinite, had dwindled to a fraction of its former glory. Maintaining their presence at the breakers became increasingly dependent on the Preservation Society's goodwill. The descendants found themselves in an uncomfortable position, living in a home their family had built, guests in their own ancestral mansion. The Preservation Society, for its part, faced mounting costs for maintaining the aging property. Every year brought new repairs, new expenses, new challenges in keeping a Gilded Age palace functioning as a modern museum. What had begun as a partnership between family and preservationists was becoming something more fraught, a relationship where gratitude mixed with resentment, where the meaning of preservation itself was up for debate. At the dawn of 1998, the breakers appeared to exemplify a rare success story in American preservation. The mansion stood as magnificent as ever, its rooms meticulously maintained, its grounds precise. More remarkably still, Paul and Gladys Chapare, great-grandchildren of the legendary Cornelius Vanderbilt II, continued to reside in their third-floor quarters. The Preservation Society's board president that year even put the arrangement in writing, noting how valuable it was to tell visitors that the original owner's great-great-grandchildren continued to live in the house. It gave the tours an authenticity that no amount of period furniture or costumed guides could replicate. Paul and Gladys weren't merely tenants clinging to faded glory. Both served on the board of trustees, contributing their time to fundraising events, and shared family stories with researchers and visitors alike. They understood their unique position as living bridges between the breakers' past and present. Yet beneath this carefully maintained facade, the relationship was beginning to fracture. The death of their mother, Countess Anthony Chapare, marked a subtle but significant change in dynamics. Without her presence as the last direct link to Gladys Vanderbilt, the younger Chapares found their position increasingly precarious. They began to sense a change in how the Preservation Society viewed them, less as partners in preservation, more as relics themselves. Their contribution to the mansion's operations seemed to carry less weight in board discussions. Their suggestions about maintaining family traditions were politely acknowledged, but seemed to be quietly ignored. The warning came with chilling directness from the board president. Their occupancy, he made clear, hung by the thinnest of threads. One wrong move, one moment of discord, and they could find themselves on the street. It was hardly the kind of thing one said to valued partners in preservation. Then came the flashpoint that would ultimately seal their fate. The Preservation Society unveiled plans for a modern facility that would process the ever-growing crowds more efficiently. To Paul and Gladys, it represented everything wrong with the Society's evolving priorities. The visitor center would fundamentally alter the estate's carefully preserved grounds. It would transform the breakers from a glimpse into Gilded Age life into something more akin to a theme park. They opposed it publicly and vocally, invoking their family's legacy and their great-grandfather's vision. The Rhode Island Supreme Court heard their arguments in 2018. The justices listened to passionate pleas about historical integrity and architectural heritage. In the end, they ruled in favor of progress, or at least in favor of the Preservation Society's definition of it, and the visitor center could proceed. The Vanderbilt descendants had lost their influence over the estate their family had created. On August 7, 2018, the inevitable arrived in the form of an eviction notice. After decades of residency, Paul and Gladys Chapare were told to vacate their ancestral home. The official reason cited antiquated plumbing and safety concerns in the third-floor apartments. But everyone understood the real message. The family's time at the Breakers had come to an end. By 2019, the Breakers had completed its transformation from living mansion to static museum. No Vanderbilt descendants walked its halls. No family members occupied the upper floors. No direct connection remained to the people who had built and inhabited this palace by the sea. The mansion now belonged entirely to the public realm. Where once Gladys Chapare had walked her dog through private corridors, audio guides now directed streams of visitors through carefully marked routes. The third-floor apartments that had housed 4 generations of Vanderbilts were sealed off, their antiquated plumbing apparently dangerous for habitation, but not for the structure itself. The transformation brought undeniable benefits. More than 1.4 million visitors annually could now experience the full scope of Gilded Age excess, wandering through rooms that showcased both astronomical wealth and exquisite craftsmanship. Educational programs flourished, with the Preservation Society's lecture series, The Gilded Age Years, Transforming America, drawing scholars and history enthusiasts alike. The mansion had become a teaching tool, illustrating the era's stark contrast between industrial progress and social inequality. Audio tours now narrated the stories of both the family who built the Breakers and the armies of servants who maintained it. The Preservation Society had succeeded in its core mission. The Breakers would stand forever as a monument to American ambition and artistry. Yet something essential had been lost in the transition. Tour guides who could once say the family still lives upstairs now spoke only in the past tense. The human connection that made the Breakers unique among Newport mansions had been severed. Legal battles continued to cast shadows over the mansion's public image. The Chapares and other family members pursued various actions against the Preservation Society, creating a narrative of conflict that overshadowed the building's historical significance. News coverage focused less on architectural splendor and more on lawsuits and acrimony. The new visitor center, whose construction had precipitated the family's eviction, opened to mixed reviews. While it efficiently processed the crowds and provided modern amenities, critics argued it had forever altered the estate's character. The approach to the Breakers now felt more commercial than reverential. Today, the Breakers stands as many things simultaneously. It remains an architectural masterpiece and a window into the Gilded Age. But it also has become a cautionary tale about the cost of turning homes into museums. And the Vanderbilt story at the Breakers ended not with a bang, but with an eviction notice. The family that once commanded enough wealth to build this palace had been reduced to unwelcome tenants in their own creation. And now I'd love to see you in the comments. Do you believe the Preservation Society was right to evict the Vanderbilt descendants, or should they have found a way to let them remain? I look forward to hearing your thoughts below. With that said, thanks for joining us for another episode of Old Money Mansions, and we'll see you on the next one.